Welcome to the Freedom CEO podcast. It's about becoming the chief decision maker over your life in order to step into a life of freedom. From business, health, wealth, charity, and giving back to just doing life on your own terms. I am your host, Shay Invidiata. I am an award-winning activist, change maker, and a multi-facet impact entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in business, philanthropy, and health and wellness. In this space, I'm going to be bringing you insights, not just from me, but from incredible thought leaders around the globe to help you start making decisions towards living a life of freedom so you can live a life you love. Are you ready, guys? Because we are going all in. Joining me today is Tasha Fishman. She describes herself as a former people-pleasing matrix mummy who woke from a deep slumber in 2020 due to the great lie of COVID. Tasha pulled her kids out of the school system for good, which was something that she never thought she would do in her wildest dreams. A failed attempt at homeschooling and a spiritual awakening led Tasha to a road less traveled called Unschooling, which has radically changed her relationship with her kids, how she advocates and lives in a world gone wild. Tasha is on a heart-led freedom mission, and you're going to find out why. Guys, this is such an important episode, and I encourage you to share it with those you love to get this message out. I am so excited today to welcome Tasha onto the Freedom CEO podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to unpack this conversation today. And I felt that before we dive in, for those listening, watching, tuning in, I'm going to put a little bit of a disclaimer. Tasha and I are going to be having a heavy conversation, but it is one of these conversations that could absolutely change the entire course of your life if you let it. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the most important conversations to be having, maybe in our lifetime, certainly up to this point in all of our lives with so much that's going on in the world. And Tasha, you have had such an incredible, I'm going to call it like a transformation, this awakening. And you described yourself as a people-pleasing matrix mommy.
Yeah.
Try saying that 5 times fast, but a people-pleasing matrix mommy. So I want to start there. I want to understand, number one, like, what is the matrix? I think that word gets thrown around a lot today, and it can maybe mean some things to other people. So for you, like, what is the matrix, and how are you the people-pleasing matrix mommy?
Yeah. So I guess why I describe myself as that is I see where I am today, which is exactly the opposite. I was forced to walk through the fire of initiation, of letting go of what other people thought of me the minute that I started questioning uncomfortable truths publicly back in 2020. I, at that time, had no idea how much hate and vitriol was going to come my way just by doing so. Right. I lost many friendships, many acquaintances, lost business. I decided to move out of the house that we had built where I thought I would raise my children until, and move out of the area of the school they were going to go to and leave the neighborhood of which I'd been for 10 years because my neighbors were starting to walk on the other side of the street when they would pass my house, and it was insane. So it's something I certainly don't regret, and I would do it all over again, but it was extremely painful. So when I look back at the version of myself at the beginning of this journey, I would consider myself, I wouldn't have maybe at the time, had you have asked me in 2019 if I was a people pleaser, but I look back and I certainly see that absolutely I was. And what I mean by matrix is I was just doing what everyone else was doing. I was schlepping my kids to and from activities, putting them on the bus in the morning, getting them to school. I never, ever questioned what was being taught in schools. I never questioned curriculum. I didn't think anything. It was like, I didn't even think of the values of the individual teachers. I mean, pretty much it was like, which school do I want to send them to? Do they want to go to French school? They want to go to private school? They did both. You know, you kind of find your groove. But there was no thought process about what are they actually learning? How much time are they spending? Could their minds be molded, or you know, could there be some indoctrination? Like that didn't even cross my mind. So there were some times where my kids missed the bus and they would say, "Mommy, you know, would you homeschool us?" And I would say, "Yeah, absolutely not. I'm driving you. Let's go." You know, because I could not fathom the life the way I had it structured doing that. Like, what do you mean homeschool? Like I'm working with my husband in our family business. I love my free time. I was with you from 0 to 5, you know, every day. You know, I like to have my tea hot from beginning to end, or have a conversation during the day. Like, I can't even imagine. What do you mean homeschool? I was not a granola type attachment parenting, you know, breastfeeding till they were 3 or 4. And nothing to say bad about those moms. Those moms are in my community. Those are the moms that some of them that I turned to when I was looking for answers, but that wasn't me. And I think that's why I'm so relatable to so many people is because there is a massive spiritual awakening happening right now. So that's what I mean by matrix. I was running around, not questioning why I was running around. I was doing everything and taking on the bake sales, the Terry Fox runs, the brown shirt days, the pink shirt days, you know, schlepping, going to school. Like, I mean, by the time I'd get them into bed, we'd be reading, you know, it's like every movie you see, the parents are like sleeping. Well,
Totally.
I mean, how we kept up with that. And for people who are still doing it, I'm sure they can't relate to what I'm saying. But for those who have exited the school matrix, I call it, you totally know what I'm saying. It's like, I look at my old friends or my neighbors, and I look at the school bus, pick them up, and I look at the papers and I see people like when we went to the science center and the zoo this week, and we just go.
Sure.
And I'm watching all the school classes, and they have the binders full of stuff, and they have to sit and do the things. And it's not to say that some of those things wouldn't be great, but you can't tell me that every kid in that class wants to sit and do and write a paper about the animal that they saw and then put together the thing. I mean, it's, you know, I've gone down all the rabbit holes to understand exactly what that is. And you cannot take nothing for face value anymore. Like everything that we are seeing and witnessing around the world all looks pretty like with a bow on top on the outside, but there is underneath it a self-serving attribute.
Totally. So, okay, tell me, like, when you say you like look back even in 2020 and you've really shifted, you've grown out of, you've awakened from this people-pleasing matrix mom, and you really had this, you woke up from the slumber, like you woke up from the ashes. What was your moment? What happened for you that caused you to actually start asking questions? Maybe not even challenging the narrative, but just start asking questions.
Well, like I said, when I say spiritual awakening, I mean it, because it's going to sound to the average person like insanity. So you can only explain sometimes these types of things with divine intervention. Sure. So I was so unconspiratorial, just to give you an idea, at the beginning of the pandemic, like I actually bought hook, line, and sinker, the narrative, the first 2-3 weeks. I was involved with helping our company make masks for free and deliver them to hospitals and people, because I thought that's what you need to do. I was on mainstream media outlets. I really, it wasn't until we didn't go back after the 2 weeks that I started to go, that's strange. And my sister-in-law came over one night. She says, you have to watch this. And it was a video of the fall of Kabul. And I always make a disclaimer about this. Like, I'm not about politics. I don't believe in Trump. I don't believe in anything. I don't think any politician is going to save us. I think that it is two wings of the same bird, and we are under a mind control psyop that we have choice, and it's illusion. It's an illusion. But at the beginning, what that did for me, though, is it opened my mind to another narrative, another possibility. So that was really key. And then I also saw a video from David Nino Rodriguez. And he was just sitting around during that 2 weeks as well. And he did that video about child trafficking and about the pedos in Hollywood and that things were going down. And when he said adrenochrome and explained that there is another industry that's bigger and more massive than arms and weapons combined and drugs, I was like, boom. Like, I don't know what. Like, unlike you, who had been working for an organization that you started for 14 years, I wasn't doing that. I was as much aware of child sex trafficking as the average person who knew that, yes, children go missing and they're on the back of the milk carton. And, like, there was zero idea that we're talking millions of kids a year. So that video pierced my soul. I started to cry immediately. I called my sister-in-law, and he didn't even really get into it. It's just that it's like, when you cry and it's like they say it's your soul communicating, like you just have this knowingness, like truth vibrates at a frequency that not only we hear, we can feel. And I was like, boom, I called her. I said, I don't know what this is, but I want to be part of the solution. And I cried. And that was it. That was the door that opened the Alice in Wonderland. I mean, I jumped down those holes and, I almost lost my marriage because of it. I feel he'll say, but I wasn't even sure I could relate to him anymore. He certainly couldn't relate to me. He thought I had gone bananas. I grabbed the kids. I said, we're not going back to school. There's no way. I convinced my husband I got a homeschool for a year. I went to our cabin out in the woods. We sold the house. We downsized in the city so he could work and he would come on weekends. And I would literally hide from him during the week, researching. I couldn't stop, right? Because once you unravel one thing, you start to unravel it all like a sweater.
Totally.
You can't stop. And so that was the beginning. That was the beginning of it all.
And as you're unraveling, you're starting to see these random kind of, I'm going to call them dots of information here and there. As you start to unravel, they actually all connect together. And then there's an even bigger problem, an even bigger agenda that's going on versus an isolated issue, maybe like human trafficking, maybe like Black Lives Matter, maybe like that shooting, maybe like forest fires going off together, right? Like, it's not what we look at as this one incident. You start to connect the dots and you'll start to see that there's actually this commonality thread. And as you're unraveling, you start to see that it's always the same players that end up at the top. They all have something to do with all of these very different incidences and these different dots, if you will, all over. So I totally can relate to the unraveling, and you mentioned like, I think I got a jump start in a lot of ways around, obviously what was going on with human trafficking. And, when 2020 happened, I think this was on a global scale, was really the first time that the world, not just mainstream media, but the world was actually talking about human trafficking of children. You brought up adrenochrome, these pedophile rings. And it really, for me, there was a lot around going conspiracy theory. And I was getting called on to all kinds of things to say, is this true? Even like Wayfair. Remember the whole thing with, is Wayfair selling children? I could take you on walmart.ca right now and show you pillows that are $10,000 that don't make sense. And we could spend a good 10, 15 minutes going down just that and me comparing language of how you describe those pillows and showing you how we're actually talking about a child in one pillow versus the other. And there's ongoing investigations right now into that. So, I mean, it's very hard to digest. I can totally understand. And it's not just this topic too. I'm sure, like there's a lot of things that I'm sure you were bringing to your husband, and it's going like, how do you metabolize this all? And you guys made a huge not even just like a pivot. It was like a 180 of like downsizing, selling everything. How in this process, you know, I hear you saying it and it's courageous and I commend you for it. And in similar ways, I did the same thing differently, but exiting from Canada and investing down in Costa Rica. But I don't have children. And so that for some people becomes, I'm going to say, easier. And it is easier. I don't have two little people or even one little person to care for, and then also navigate how they're digesting this process. And, you know, you've really taken on this torch for not just the kids, but the parents, and diving into the unschooling. So how was this transition? Did you find it was challenging for your kids, or how was that for them?
Well, I have three. So I have a 20-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old now. But at the time, my 20-year-old was in, he was 17 and he was in his graduating year, grade 11, going into grade 12. So it was too late for him. I'm his stepmom, but he's with us full time. My two other ones were in grade 4 and grade 1. So they were just happy. They were just happy to be home. They were fine with it. It was good until we started to have to do the curriculum. When I set up like the kitchen table school, and made it and then, I was like, this is going to be great. We're just going to do 2 or 3 hours of work a day. Yeah. And it was an epic fail. It didn't go the way I thought at all. And that's what led me into unschooling. So there was two timelines going on for me. One was I was waking up to the corruption of all the systems of which we've been raised and understanding the evils of the world. And then I was also, out of necessity, unraveling and figuring out about school itself and questioning, its purpose and why homeschool was so difficult. And what am I going to do? And out of necessity, I ended up divine intervention again, finding unschooling. And I know that was a thing. I didn't know it was legal. I had no idea it was a philosophy, but all I knew is here I was on a macro level fighting for our freedoms, went to the truckers convoy, fast forward a bit, started working with Taking Back Our Freedoms, seeing the tyranny that was going on in Canada on a global scale. And then I'm seeing where it's going on a micro scale at home while I'm trying to homeschool and having these power struggles with my kids. Right. And I'm realizing it all has to change. And unschooling, the philosophy of it is freedom. Right. Like, children are literally on the bottom of the totem pole when we talk about freedom. We just need to follow us around and do what we say for the parents. There's so many myths. So there was 2 awakenings, 2 timelines happening. This is happening on the big level. I'm bringing it back home in my home and being like, okay, where am I a tyrant? Where do I impose my will on my children? Right. Where do I control and decide what they do, what they say, what they think, and what they feel? Like all the time. Yeah. And through that awakening, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I was trained how to be a parent. They want freedom just as much as I do. Totally. So it was crazy because some days I'd be listening to podcasts. I studied under Dana Martin vigorously. And I would be like, do what you want. Da, 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 da. And then at the same time, I'm learning about the Wayfarer, the this, the that, the that. And I'm like, you can't go outside. Just stay there so I can see you. You know what I mean? Like, it was literally like schizophrenic sometimes because I'm fighting for freedom, looking for freedom, and then being like wanting to constrict and contract because the world is not what I thought it was. I mean, of course I knew and was aware of dangers and stranger danger, but I had no idea that we were like in the Truman Show. Right. And that this was a facade. Yep. This fake reality. So my kids adjusted fine. I would say that, and I say this to all my parents who I coach now, the kids will be fine. It's you that you have to work on. We're the ones that are laden with all the toxic beliefs and have been trained and conditioned to think that our children need to be together in the same manufactured date of birth, in the same room, at the same school, learning the same stuff. I mean, we're the ones that believe and took on the lie that we aren't capable of living harmoniously with our children anymore at the age of 5. We need to hand them over to the state. Well, we know what the state's been up to. Yeah. Like, if we can all agree that this is the biggest psyop that we've witnessed on a global scale, And at the top, there's such a level of corruption that they are actually in a cover-up right now. How can we trust these people to mold the minds of our youth?
Yes.
And I haven't even gotten into the rainbow takeover yet.
Yeah.
This is just pre-COVID stuff. That hadn't even been starting.
Totally.
So I literally went from on the front lines, convoy, freedom, like, you know, the whole thing, kids pulled out, And now I find myself in, you know, COVID 2.0 with the LGBTQ plus whatever alphabet soup movement that's happening in our schools. Yeah. And I'm not even in school. I mean, I could literally just go off with my kids in the sunset and do my thing.
Right.
But I feel called to speak truth at this time, whether it's publicly or not. Because I burnt down my old life.
Yes.
And through that, found the most amazing people on the other side. So that's just a disclaimer for those of you who are fence sitters still. When you do live your truth and you do break through and you do burn down those old friendships and that kind of your old matrix, there's something so much better on the other side and so much more fulfilling.
Totally. Yes. Yeah. Amazing. And so, okay, you talk a lot about the macro versus the micro. And I agree, before even tapping onto the rainbow agenda, taking it back a bit around really the dark agenda in general and systems. Like, I still really feel, and you would also see this more so even with parents, that there's still really a struggle for a lot of people to understand, like, that there is a problem with the schools. I mean, probably since January really of this year, I think more parents are questioning that, because what we're seeing with the trans movement coming in and it being literally in unison hit so hard globally everywhere at one time, which I'm sure you can agree on. Most humans can't do anything in sync at the same time unless it's been planned for a very long time and you decide a rollout date. Because that's really kind of what it felt like. It was like one day we still got all of this stuff going on in schools, sure. But it was like January hit and like the veil just came up and this whole other movement came down. Let's come back to that. Let's unpack first, like when you're saying the system and the dark agenda that's there, unpack that for some people, like around the school system.
Right. So I started to dive deep into the foundations of compulsory school, like who started it, where it came from, because it really is like a 200-year experiment. What we were doing before is we were agriculturally living on farms. We had our children with them. They worked the farms, and we had strong community, families, clans, and which has all been broken up. So as far as I can see, this has been, this war is like hundreds of years. Right? It's been slow dripped into us to break up the family unit. Like, we have been infiltrated and we're all just kind of waking up to that now. But when you understand who's behind the medical scientific cult mafia, and you start researching and understanding the Rockefeller Institute, these families, these old elite families that own 98% of the world's resources because they fall under BlackRock and Vanguard, which own everything. So they're actually hiding as technocrats behind companies. And you see that pharmaceutical industries and, our political, they fund all the political and they own all the media. And then you find out, you see, oh my gosh, as you start to do research with, when it comes to schools, that these same families, the Rockefellers, the Carnegie, all were the ones that were funding in the money for and setting up educational boards. I call it now predatory philanthropy, just like we have Bill Gates today and George Soros, right? Yeah. So back then, and we still have the Rockefeller Foundation, but back then it was some of the actual guys that were investing in the idea of education. And when you listen to some of their manifestos or you read some of the things they said, this was all of an invested interest for business. To make people and children into a commodity, into consumers, into slaves for their empires. And our model, our factory school institutional model actually comes from Prussia Prussian origins. And that was before Germany. And it was a militant-like structure in order to capture the minds of the youth, to make sure they were obedient to the state. So that is the actual roots of school. And once you kind of open your mind up to that, you start looking at the school itself and you're like, wow, everything serves a purpose. The bells, the way they split up the subjects. Now, of course, when you go talk to Susie Crabapple down the street, the teacher that you love, and you're going to think, oh, that just can't be true. She says, I'm not talking about, although I do have a problem with some of the people that are still working in these institutions and are not speaking, because now it's been 3 years.
Right.
And so the ones that are reaching out to me, like I have teachers reach out to me weekly, are preparing to exit with their own children come this fall, or they have exited, or they want to say something, but they're waiting for certain financial things to come into place. So that's happening too. So there are still good ones in there, but they are silenced because they have their own timeline to get out. Yeah. So if you want your child to become an automaton, that is molded by how the government wants them to be, then by all means, send them to government schools. Yeah. Private schools are the same thing, especially up in Canada, because they take the funding from the government. So don't think that you're any better off. You're not. It's the entire structure is there and designed to serve the matrix being the society, the idea of collectivism, to create, a servant.
Yes.
A servitor for the elites. That's what it is. Now, you will have in some of your upper echelon Ivy League schools, they are getting trained to become the managers of the servitors for the elites. And so they think that they are, better off.
Sure.
And they are in the upper echelons and they come from these prestigious schools and they get these jobs and they become investment bankers, or they become running companies and but they're just as much as part of the slave system as we are. They just get paid more to manage us. Same with the military, same with the police. I mean, if the police weren't under paycheck mind control, they would be arresting right now the politicians that are trying to kill us 100%. And our children.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by system. So we start to wake up to the medical industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
They all serve each other in unison, and they are all compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis by this ruling class elites that have been running the human farm for millennia or for however long.
Totally. Yeah. You brought up, you said something about the children and capturing their minds. And I want to ask you if you've ever heard this quote and if you know who this is. The quote is, "He who gains the mind of the youth owns the future." Have you heard that?
I haven't, but it sounds precise. Or the other one from Malcolm X, only a fool would let his enemy educate his children.
Totally. Well, do you want to take a stab at who, or take a guess at who said that quote that I shared?
I would say, is it somebody from way back? Somebody really?
Within the last 100 years. What year are we in? Right? Yeah, within the last 100 years.
I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Hitler.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, when I've always used that quote around literally the premise around human trafficking. And when I talk to parents, that's the result, or like, that's the reaction I get, is like, holy, like, wow. But it perfectly demonstrates everything that you just said with the upper elites and the system that we're in now. And then when you look at what is going on in our schools, furthermore, around the transgender movement right now, and gender reassignment and body dysphoria and all of this confusion, and breaking the family down and breaking the child down to recondition their brain further for what they are wanting to utilize them for. And it's a very powerful statement, because as a parent, when you understand that there are these institutions that are governed by these elites that are wanting to control, as you broke it down so eloquently, that's the goal. They want to own your child's mind. And if they're able to do that, they literally can have your kid do whatever they want. They will own the future. And so as you were talking, that's what made me think of that. I was like, I want to ask you if you've ever heard this quote. So
right. I can tell you what I've been reading lately, though, when it comes to Hitler. So I've been going way, way back and reading some stuff on the Thule Society. And the Thule Society is an ancient Greco-Uranian cult that believed that an Aryan nation was going to come to power one day of homosexual men.
Right.
And they believed in sacrifice and all sorts of things. And they were quite militant. And they are actually, so they are the ones that started the Boy Scout communities. This is back in the Prussian days. And the leaders, they would molest these boys, sexually abuse them. There's lots of counts of this. And they would tell them stories about this Aryan nation over the campfire that was going to come. And they also used the symbolism of the double thunderbolts and the swastika. So see this in their literature. So they actually created the arm of the Thule Society was the Nazi Party. But think about it, to come out in the open, you're going to have to reel back your ideas of Greco boy man love and these ideas of pedophilia. So the roots of pedophilia go way, way back. But it's interesting that they go and they formulate into the Nazism. And so when these little boys back from Boy Scout days when the war came, when Hitler came to rise, these boys were prominent men in different sectors of the society, probably with certain sexual-based trauma, and saw the symbolism of the swastika and the thunderbolts, the SS, and were hearing the rhetoric of what Hitler was saying. They knew, okay, it's time, this is happening. And imagine the fear in them or whatnot. It just gives a different perspective of why people fell in line.
Right.
So then when you go into it more, you realize that, and I'm Jewish. So when I speak on these matters, I've had a lot of my Jewish family like completely disown me. I was speaking on stuff and I was comparing what Trudeau was doing to Hitler back in 2020. And people were getting upset with me because in the Jewish culture, you're not even supposed to say his name, but we need to say his name. And we need to quit calling people anti-Semites every time they want to question anything that a Jewish person does. It's crazy. So maybe that's my role in all this. But anyway, just to say, so then you move into realizing that, only 8 people were tried and convicted at the Nuremberg trials. Only 8 out of all those people. And then you're like, Project Paperclip, 1,600 of them were guaranteed, asylum in the States and worked for NASA and for the government so that so you can see that the ideology, the Nazism, the dark force just moves. It just moves like a snake and slides through different places. It's never died. That's why I'm saying we're dealing with hundreds of years. This is a big war. It's been a long war. It's been going on for a long time.
And let me ask you, what do you think the purpose, the intent, the end goal is of this war?
Transhumanism and Depop. Okay. I'll tell you, I was listening to Dr. Lima, I'm going to say her name wrong, but I can send you the link. And she has a website called Stop Genocide 2030. She's 79 years old and she is a fire snapper, just a whipper. And her husband was killed for speaking out. So they were doctors, holistic psychiatrists. And she talks about this story back in the early 2000s. She had a client who was part of the monarchy. I don't know if she wasn't a queen, but she was very high up and she was helping her with some physical ailment. And at one point, this woman said to her, "Oh, the great culling is coming soon." And the doctor said, "What do you mean the great culling?" And she said, "Well, you know what a culling is." And she goes, "Yes, I know what a culling is, but what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, we're moving out of the whatever such and such system into the neo-feudalism system." And she's like, what? And she's like, we're going to rid ourselves of the useless eaters. And she said, well, what's a useless eater? Now, you got to remember at the time, this is like 20 years ago, nobody knew what a useless eater was. We've all heard it now that are in the freedom movement awake. But so she said, what's a useless eater? And she goes, anybody who's using up our unrenewable resources.
Right.
Our unrenewable. Yes. Well, how do you know you're not using up their renewable unrenewable resources? And she said, oh, no, you don't understand. We're moving into the neo-feudalism system where us, the neo-elites will be at the top, and then we will have our servitors around us, and we will have to get rid of the rest. And she said, well, what do you mean the rest? How many of the rest? And she said, 90%.
Yeah.
So imagine hearing that almost 25 years ago. So she said, I thought to myself, this woman is batshit crazy. Right. And maybe I didn't catch it because I was working on a physical ailment and I didn't do a psychiatric report on her. Or she just gave me the biggest clue ever. Mm-hmm. And she went to her husband. She said, we need to close down the clinic. We need to start working on the freedom health movement. If we don't get put in some strategy and not just tactics here, we are going into a genocide. And so they've been working on this forever. And he was killed. He was murdered. And so she says, I'm still here. So she has this website of action steps you can take. And she's actually outspoken about what's happening with the UN, UNESCO, the pedophilia stuff. But so interesting. So interesting. Big time.
And I'll put that in the show link. So definitely we'll connect that in because it's critical. Sorry, go ahead.
Just to say that you asked me what the goal was. So what that was just one piece that I'm saying. So to me, it's depopulation, but it's also transhumanism. That's where the transmania train movement, whatever you want to call it, is moving us towards. That's where the digital citizenship is moving us towards. It's all towards this transhumanism, like capture the consciousness.
I mean, I absolutely agree with both. My question I want to ask you, just to gain your perspective on it, is could that not be achieved without inducing the sexualization of children, gender reassignment, the pedophilia? For you, like why and how does that play into the end goal?
Well, because not everybody was going to fall for the vaccine. They can't kill everybody with a vaccine, and they couldn't be sure because this is one of the biggest global experiments they've ever done, right? So they don't really know. So I think that's why everything's like a quickening. It's happening all at once, like rapid fire. We are in a war. I mean, we're in a civil war. Our country right now is being completely deconstructed. Yeah. But half of the people, 3/4 of the people don't want to talk about it. They are in a comfort coma. That's what's going on. And so, or they're terrified, whatever it is. But in terms of the transgender movement and what's happening there, the whole thing with these ones at the top, they don't, how do I say this? From the research that I've done, the people at the very, very top are Luciferians. So they worship something else than what we do. And so to me, a Luciferian who is disconnected from their soul and from God and very committed to evil is not going to access the higher realms of their being, which to me is discernment and all of the beautiful things that come with being human and having a heart, having empathy and compassion. They've had to disconnect those cords in order to align themselves with evil. So when people say, there's no way this could happen, there's no way people would do this, or there's no way that anyone could do that, that's because you're thinking how you think. And you think that nobody would do that. But that is what has kept us in a childlike, naive state to be able to be played in such a manner. We have to adult up, wake up, and realize that there is evil, and that this whole idea of taking God out of schools and saying, the devil doesn't exist and that's all nonsense and all of these things has been manufactured over time to make us turn a blind eye and think that that's all hogwash. Right. In reality, the reality is that everything in the movies is probably true.
I know. I agree. Yeah.
which is scary because there's a lot of stuff on there. Like, I have never wanted to watch a scary movie. I don't like that stuff. I used to think to myself, if I don't think of evil or invite the devil in, he won't come. I'll be fine. That'll be my thing. Like, stay out and we're good. But that keeps you in a naive state, because then you cannot see a wolf in sheep's clothing. You don't know your enemy.
Totally.
So the transgender is the Trojan horse. It is there to divide. So these people that rule us, they use the Marxist playbook, the divide and conquer. When you understand that their God that they worship is transgender, that Baal, the ancient god, like Baphomet, then it's easier for you to put the pieces together. Oh, this is the biggest child sex trafficking we've ever seen. This is the biggest child sacrifice at the altar of the rainbow that we've ever seen, right? Let's
100%.
confuse them. Let's sterilize them all. Now, you have one group of people that will say it's all about the money. Certainly it is for the people that are working for the evil ones. But there's two things going on. So the evil ones have all their minions that they're paying with money. And those ones think, oh, I'm making all this money. And they're in the, they've been entrapped and enslaved by that. But they're really using them too. And they'll turn on them eventually as well. Yeah, there really is a small group of evil people at the top that have a big plan, even for their minions.
Yeah.
So there are a group of people that are doing this. There are industries that are working for the money. There are medical industries that are making billions. There are NGOs that are putting in billions to organizations, to put politicians in place, to put makeup lines, the woke companies, like across the board. You have to wonder, how is this happening and why is it happening? They just changed the definition of woman in the Webster's dictionary to person who identifies and feels as such. Okay. Yeah. Like, they just named in the Netherlands, it took away the Women's Museum and named it like Persons Museum. And they have a statue of a man breastfeeding a child. Like, they are going to long-term change the story, like they did with the Spanish flu and every other lie we've been told. And oh, COVID, this big pandemic, or men always had babies. This is why you're hearing the mantra, the rhetoric. Trans rights are humans' rights. Trans people have always existed. Like, what? No, they haven't always existed. They were documented in 1950s, and they were called transvestites. And they were men who were like either seriously dysfunctional mentally, or they were abused in such a way that they had a fetish to put on women's clothing. Yeah. That's what it was. And then there's this body dysmorphia. And now all of a sudden we have an entire generation. Like, there are tens of thousands of children that are identifying as something else right now. They did not do that alone.
No, they didn't.
Just an onslaught. It's like, they're just they all want to commit suicide. They all want to jump out of a building right now.
Totally.
It's just, we got to save the kids. They're born in the wrong body. Like, wake up, people.
And you have to question too, like, you were a kid once. We were all children once. This was not happening at all when you and I were growing up and we were kids, And so the other question, I always challenge is, why aren't we seeing the same proportion, maybe a little higher now, but shouldn't we see this escalation or like some documentation that this was a problem when I was a kid, when you were a kid? And we just don't have it. It doesn't exist. It's like all of a sudden now, even when you're seeing amongst the adults, if so many children are confused and identifying differently than what they were genetically born with, should we not see that same proportion amongst the adults of these men or women also coming out and now saying that? But it's not. We're seeing this highly targeted. The volume that's coming out is amongst the children that they're proclaiming. And so even that logically, scientifically, with ratio and numbers and mathematics does not work. It just doesn't work. It's not even that it doesn't make sense. It's not there. The data is not there to support it. So yeah, I agree with you.
No, it's not there to support it. This is exactly like COVID. It was a complete rollout.
Yeah.
And it's harming our children, and it's harming the next generation. And and they don't care about the consequences because this is a war, and they know it. It's just that most of us don't. They don't care. Like when you think about what's going to happen in 10 or 15 years, when you have a population that is sterilized, that is angry that you didn't step in as a parent, although they've created all these laws and put these laws in place so that we can't, or we'll go to jail. I just read the bill C4 yesterday as I was trying to put together this presentation, and I actually read through the bill, and my heart stopped when it said at the third point was, you cannot take your child abroad for conversion therapy. You cannot have any professionals see your child. So there are no psychiatrists, psychologists, natural or health practitioner can counsel your child. You can't, and you can't take them abroad for it. Now, if you don't see that as an attack on your kids and the erosion of parental rights, then you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Like, this is insane. So if my son comes down and decides he wants to be a girl, which will never happen because they're not in school, and I have saved them the past 3.5 years from all of that, they don't even know. I've explained to them what's going on, but they do not know what I'm seeing with the other kids. There's a huge difference. And if anybody studies, I would say go see my coach, Jason Christoph, to understand about mind control and subliminal messaging and the subconscious part of our brain that looks for repetitive content, which is why you're always seeing COVID, stay safe, do this, and these little nuances. And now it's like too cute to be cis, and cisgender and 150 pronouns and rainbows getting smashed in your throat, because the more repetitive the lie, it becomes truth. And that is what has worked for the ancient ruling group of families that are culling the human farm. That's what they have been doing for millennia, and every 100 years. This is why they went after the old people first. They don't want the old people talking to the young people like us and telling us, hey, I've seen this before, when the governments came in the day. No. Now we're going to medically euthanize them. Yeah. And we're going to be really humane. But at first with COVID, we were trying to save them. We were trying to save Granny. That was the big shtick. Now we've got to let them go, be passionate, and then they're going to try to lower that age to the age of 12, like they did with the vaccine. You don't need consent. So people who are having crisis, let me tell you, anyone who's still in the school system that's listening to this or has gone through the hoops the last 3 years, I'm sending you so much love, because you have trauma, and so do your children. Whether you know it, whether you want to admit it, it is just the truth. If you had to navigate through the masks, the social distancing, the BS, the vaccines, and now you're dealing with the rainbow takeover, and you're still trying to go through this, you're under mind control for sure. Hopefully that there's something in here that's sparking in this conversation that's going to get you into the next level of your awakening and looking for researching, because it's all there. Nothing's hidden. But I send you so much love, because this isn't easy. And the people that are waking up to this at the 11th hour are going to have the hardest time, where people like you and I, Shay, are going to have to hold space for them.
Totally. And I agree, not just even holding space, but getting prepared for the worst that is yet to still come. It is on the horizon. And for years, and I think a lot of us have seen certain content that we've posted. Not only are we being censored, and, you get all of those warnings on Instagram around this violating community standards. And it was one thing over the past 2 years that Freedom, that's the name of my nonprofit, we got shut down for a little bit because we're talking about children, not adults. We're talking about kids being trafficked and kids being raped and kids being abused. And for the longest time, I've been saying how Instagram, which we know is owned by Facebook, is really facilitating this pedophilia ring, sex trafficking. And it's really hard for a lot of people to stomach that. And I talk a lot to parents about the apps that their children's are on, not just Instagram, Snapchat, but things like Roblox as well, those video games. And only recently, I'm not sure if you actually had a chance yet to see this, but just recently, the Wall Street Journal. Okay, so for some people maybe listening, where mainstream media is what you turn to decide if it's true or not. But in the Wall Street Journal, Instagram is being called on. Mark Zuckerberg is being challenged around connecting a vast pedophilia network, and that their systems are actually fostering communities guided for child sex content. And this is the gateway for me. So much of what we're looking at right now in the woke movement is the gateway for the plus symbol, for what is coming down next, to allow adults to, what I call, rape children, because there is no such thing as sex with a minor, sex with children, words that don't go together. And how do you even then, as a parent, wrap your head around that when, as we're seeing already in the school systems, them starting to speak to kids about masturbation at such a younger age and introducing adults around children and that sexualization? And it's like, if you can't find your footing right now on this, as you alluded to, it's going to be even that much more difficult when it's hard to believe. The harder stuff is coming. It is on the horizon.
100%. Yeah. Pull your kids out now. I mean, I'm doing a presentation with Jason Christoff, July 25th, free to the public. It's on Zoom, to explain and go into more depths, because to understand what's happening right now, to really go back in history. So what's going on in Canada and the US is that our sexual education curriculum has been tabled and, developed by pedophiles, is what it is. We've got Alfred Kinsey, John Money, who's the guy who coined gender identity. We have Ben Levin up here in Canada, who was the deputy minister for Kathleen Wynne, who actually helped create SOGI 123. He's actually a convicted pedophile. He was in jail. He served less than 2 years on a 3-year sentence for saying that he had child pornography, he produced child pornography, and alluding to sexual crimes with children,
right.
Which really, he said that he raped all 3 of his daughters, and he fantasized about being with his infant grandchildren. So these are the type of degenerates that get positioned and seated in politics and positions of power to make decisions. But who does this serve? So then you have to kind of go back a little further. Like Alfred Kinsey, the Kinsey Institute today is still being supported by taxpayer dollars. He used, for those of you who don't know, pedophiles as his data and research to disillusion the American public and start the sexual revolution by telling them that way more people were having affairs and were more sexual. Right. But he was using data from real pedophiles he was paying the pedophiles to molest all the way from 2 months old to 15. Yeah. So on that predatory data, we are basing the public sexual education system. Yeah. So how did these guys get empowered to do this? Well, they didn't do it alone. The entire system is set up because if you go back to the roots of the Thule Society and probably further before that, pedophilia runs amok within this group. And so the people that own us and rule us and that are at the top of these institutions are actually worshiping and involved in something that is hidden from public. And so the laws, even Alfred Kinsey was involved in 1948 of changing the laws for women and children in safe spaces. Trudeau is trying to diminish the laws for pedophiles. In Canada, you can go and rape and whatever, and you're only in there for a year or two. Why is that? Why did we get let go? What is going on? And I mean, of course, these are questions that when they don't affect you, you just don't think about, but they are affecting us now. And now is the calling, and it's time to wake up. This is it. So this is why you're seeing all of this curriculum and these things being pushed on our kids. They want it in their brain because they are waiting for the day. Listen, we are just the parents standing in the way of this evil and the next generation. They want your kids, and trust me, if you keep them in these institutions, they will turn to you one day and say, you're a bigot, mom. You're a transphobe, mom. I can't even tell how many parents reach out to me and that they're in that situation. And of course that's going to happen because that's what this type of curriculum is designed to do. Just like with the schmack scene, same thing. It was saying, oh, let's show you a video your old school parents don't want you to. That's really, irresponsible. But you can do it over here at the schools anyway. Like we are in a war, people. Like we are. I'm sure everyone listening here, I'm preaching to the choir, but I get fired up. Like,
As it should. That's what it should invoke in people. And I am so grateful for your voice and the work that you're doing. And even if you're listening to this and you're going, yes, I'm right on board with everything that's being said, then you've got to share this episode. You got to share the message, because there's still so many people that need to have their awakening and really see the truth. It's not even just about an awakening. And this is what I've always said, actually, from the beginning. Your opinion, my opinion doesn't matter. Shay's opinion does not matter. Tasha's opinion, it does not matter. What matters is the truth. And this is why it is so important that we continue to question everything we're hearing. It's like, go take what Tasha's talked about, even the names, go challenge it, go look up the research, because truth never needs a defense. And if you're a seeker of that, you will find it. And that will be your aha moment. That will be your awakening moment. And I love, Tasha, how you said that everything worth it was on the other side of this hard, and losing friends, losing maybe family members, colleagues, but finding this community and just knowing that the door is open, is welcomed. And you can connect with Tasha. You are doing such great work, and everything's going to be in the show links. Definitely you should join the webinar that her and Jason are going to be doing. What a gift that it's free and it's an opportunity of no judgment. Just come, learn, listen, be you, and you're going to be enlightened, really. And it'll give you that courage, and also to see other people, right? I think that's part of it, is so many people feel like they're going to be alone. And through the work that you've done in the community you've created, you're not alone. You're just welcoming people into this new family, really.
Well, you're definitely not alone. I've got 800 people signed up already for this presentation, and I think it's capped at 1,000. So you're definitely not alone. You're going to see a lot of people there. And it's just a way to kind of compact for the fence sitters and people that are just starting to say, like, what is going on here, and need, a little bit of understanding. So with his background on like the ancient occults and mine of knowing of the agendas, we're gonna wrap it up together. And I also want to just say is, please don't believe me. Just take the resources and do what you will. Like, go on your own path. You shouldn't be believing anyone at this point. You should just be really looking for that inner compass, that discernment between you and source, because that's what we're moving towards. We're moving towards a time where we don't need to know anyone else's experience of what's happening or what truth is. We'll all be able to tap into that. But to go down that path, you have to do the research. You have to be inspired. You have to put in the work.
You do. Tasha, I'm so grateful for you to be here. You're on the Freedom CEO podcast. So before I let you go, I have to ask you one final question. When you think about being the CEO of your life, really stepping into taking ownership over your decisions, how has that brought you freedom?
Okay, well, it's funny. I just got asked to speak on a series in Acapulco called Freedom Starts at Home. I thought, what a beautiful thing to say. Isn't that true? Freedom starts at home. But it's even more than that. Like, it does start within you. And I think the biggest source of freedom is attributed to the most pain I had. And it was of actually the outside opinions of me. I think I lived in a life of being very aware of how I ought to behave and interact in society. And I always wanted to be known as the caregiver. I was in social work for many, many years. I still love caring for others. I never wanted to be in a conflict. I never wanted to have to pick a side. I went into mediation for a while. So that was the biggest source of pain, of taking control of my life and having a boundary, a line in the sand that was like, no, here and no further. with your ideas or your this or that. And, you know, I used to kind of pride myself on being a bit of a chameleon with people. And I feel that that has just been eradicated. But through that came freedom, because now I'm free to say anything. Even when you ask me, Shay, is there anything you don't want to talk about? I'm like, no, I'll talk about anything. I'll talk about my ex-plan. I'll talk about how I don't drink anymore. I'll talk about I'll talk about how I was like a closeted self-saboteur. I'll talk about it all, because I'm free and I don't care anymore about the opinions outside of me or this house or this home. And so even with my husband, like, do you know, I'm sorry if I'm going on, but I just want to add.
Love it.
We can get on the explant thing later, but you know, even him, like years ago, before 2020, if I had gone to get an explant, unless I was ill, and he said something to me like he said, which was like, oh, like he looked disappointed.
Yeah.
I would have cared.
Right.
I would have cared.
Yeah.
I don't care anymore. It's not important to me at all what anybody thinks about what I look, say, think, or feel. My children, yes, but even them, my convictions of what I know to be true and my like source connection is most important. And I feel called to speak, you know, by a divine force. And all of those things trump everything else. And that is freedom.
Amen to that. That is so beautiful and so empowering. Seriously. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Well, Tasha, I know I'm going to have you back on. We have so much more to still talk about. And so that's going to be the plan. You're going to have to come back. So stay tuned. We'll bring Tasha back. And thank you for being here today and just sharing, and keep up the good work. I love your fight.
You as well. Thank you as well. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning into the Freedom CEO podcast. If you got value out of today's show, I would love for you to leave a review, as it will help my show reach other people as well. You know what to do. Download this episode, click the like and subscribe button. If you feel like spreading more love, hop over to Instagram and share today's show in your stories. Remember to tag Shane Vidiata and the Freedom CEO. My DMs are always open, so drop me a line. I'd love to connect. Until next time, keep owning your decisions to live a life of freedom. Live a life you love.